welcome everybody. I'm just going to give a tiny bit of time to see these numbers go a bit up, because I can see people coming in. So thank you so much for joining. I can see some, I could say familiar faces, but I'm not seeing you. I can see familiar names on it. Welcome. Thank you for joining. Okay. I'm just going to start. Once again, thank you for joining. My name is Paula Alvarez Vaccaro. I'm a producer and a screenwriter, and I'm here with colleagues and friends that I really admire. And I'm so happy to be sharing this conversation about distribution in these challenging times. So Amy Hobby is a producer. You have everybody's biographies in the website, so I'm not going to go with too much extension, because you all have large careers. So I'm going to say, Amy, you may know her from as a producer, but also for her work at the Tribeca Film Institute. Thank you for joining. Ryan, you may you may know him from so many other places, including, I think, Tribeca at some point. But now you're the head of film. I am old, I remember that.
That means I'm old too. Oh no.
There you go. As a head of film from this new company called Kinema. Andy Caley is joining us from the UK, from Bohemia Media, a distributor in the UK, and Ester Bernal from Piano Distribution in Mexico. So welcome. And yesterday we were talking about the challenges that the pandemics brought to production. We had producers talking about how difficult it was, or how challenging it was to produce these days. But I think that distribution, as a conversation we started also last year on a panel, is posing the same or even more challenges in a fragmented space that has old systems and new systems vying for attention, and more films than ever. At some point, and I said it last year, but I'm going to repeat it now for those joining just now, Amy wrote something called Distribution Advocates, a Manifesto, and the conversations that started was, in a way, it resonated with me, and I think many other independent producers, because it was written from a producer perspective. So I'm gonna start asking you, Amy, where are you, and where are the distribution advocates as a collective, as a group, and where has the manifesto gone from there?
Yeah. So thank you, Paula. I'm happy to be here. Distribution Advocates has been doing quite well, actually. We just got funding. So we were, a collective kind of working on our own, having conversations, opening up the conversation to people on Clubhouse, and, being on panels and spreading the word. And we very recently got funding from, we got a grant from Sundance, from the Perspective Fund and Ford Foundation. So big news for us. We have 5 pillars of objectives that we're going to start doing, including direct advocacy with filmmakers, just creating more materials for people, doing some data projects. And so it's exciting times for us. Yeah.
Wonderful. And those pillars that the manifesto started putting out talked about unequal structures inhibiting the access to audiences. They talk about all right deals. They talk about the fuller spectrum of voices that needed to be included, and transparency in reporting, as well as the new distribution pathways to empower filmmakers with more choice, if I'm not forgetting any.
Correct.
So, or there's no addition. So I think that on that note, on the last part, especially on giving more choice, I would like to know, Ryan, that you can tell us a bit more about, for example, what you're doing at Kinema, and how can that articulate within the distribution manifesto in a way, right?
Yeah, thank you. I'm so happy to be with everyone today, so thank you for having me. Yeah, Kinema was actually meant to launch in March in 2020 as an in-person, non-theatrical event company. Flash forward a year and a half, we officially launched just a few months ago, but we quickly pivoted and created a virtual side of our business. But now, at least this week, we're back in the in-person space. So filmmakers, we work with filmmakers and distributors with their non-theatrical licenses. We are non-exclusive, and I think that what we saw throughout the pandemic is everywhere is the demise of traditional theater spaces. We did some studies, at least in the US, 50% of the cinemas in the US alone are in just 5 states. Or actually, that's 4 states. It's Florida, Georgia, Texas, and California. So it's a pretty scary odds, and looking at kind of these cinema deserts that are popping up across the country, where people have to sometimes drive an hour and a half to get to an arts center or a traditional cinema. So we really are looking to bring cinema to people in the community settings. We are working in churches and in anywhere you can host a screening that's not a traditional cinema, and you're in your living room. We're non-exclusive. We work alongside many distributors and help them fill in the gaps. Oftentimes many of our films are seen only in New York and LA. We have the ability to put the film anywhere else. We are global. That said, we right now are working mainly in the US. Our sister company is a company called Picture Motion, whom I'm sure many of you heard of, who really were one of the first impact marketing and strategy groups. So we work exclusively with them as they work with their network of organizations and philanthropists and entrepreneurs. And we're currently working with about 30,000 hosts, mainly in the US, as I said, that have the ability to license films or sell tickets so they can make a small profit for their groups.
I think we lost Paula.
I think she's frozen. I thought it was an awkward pause for a moment.
Such a good answer. It stunned her into silence.
Oh my God, I forget. Am I? Hello?
Hello. We
Yes.
hear you again.
Good. I've been having internet problems. I'm so sorry. Thank you, Ryan. But I think I caught most of it. Just about the last bit where you said she's not here. I may have lost. So while you were talking, I was thinking, yes, that space where you have churches and alternative spaces and educational licenses, I think that's something that the US has done very well, but places like the UK and especially, of course, Latin America are always a bit lagging on that, or so it feels. Yes. To feel that you can actually distribute films outside cinemas, it sometimes feels very, very difficult as a sustainable model. And my question to Esther, who does distribution as art house distribution in Mexico, for example, in a country that is fairly dominated by cineplexes and multiplexes, what have you done differently, maybe you think, that has empowered Piano as a distribution company to maybe use alternative spaces in your territory and in your own system, let's say?
Yeah, it's always hard. It's been hard before the pandemic. Of course, now with the pandemic, it's getting harder every day. But it's been interesting, for example, that we are creating a circuit, well, not the strongest circuit, but a good circuit of independent alternative cinemas. The National Cinematheque, pretty lucky for us, works perfectly because it became this beautiful space where people go without limitation. It has a lot of assistance every weekend, so this helps a lot. And you have we have assured that we are going to be there with our films like for 8 or 9 weeks. So this in a beginning helps a lot, but then we are every day looking for new spaces to support, to give them the chance to have our films. They also do a lot of things with Q&As with the directors and that kind of things that are working a lot. And we have seen that having these screens with P&As in the commercial run of the film helps a lot to people to go to the cinemas to see these films, to talk with the directors, to be near the directors, to be near the creators, and this usually helps to have full venues with people. So for one side, that is one thing we find interesting. But then post-pandemic, one of the main exhibitor companies became to us and told us, we are trying to look a new scheme for you independent distributors with art house films to make not just a release with a lot of schedules and a lot of screens in the first week, and then you go out because you don't have the enough assistance. So they told us, we are going to give you less schedules, like 1 or 2 for the first week, but we can make this with so many weeks. We can leave you there like 4 or 5 weeks, so you don't have to lose your audience in just this first weekend. That it's also that it's always very well. It kills every film. So finding this kind of perspective and this kind of set of mind to look for independent films in a different way has been interesting. It's still hard every day. It's still hard to these independent and very small venues to be representative in terms of money for the films. But I think that it's important to open these places, looking for them to become stronger and to have more audiences, so our films can keep going.
That sounds good. I mean, I heard 8 to 9 weeks for an independent film is such a big dream, right? And while she was talking, I thought, Andy, in terms of your work in the UK, why don't you tell us a bit about the concept that Bohemia has as a distribution company, and how are you looking to exploit so-called alternative spaces of distribution?
Sure. I mean, well, we initially didn't really start out in the film space, Bohemia. We've only been up and running for like just over a year now, but we have been around for a lot longer outside of film spaces. We own a pub in London, in a place called Clerkenwell, called the Apple Tree, and there it was originally, and it still is, but it's developed since, an LGBTQ plus friendly venue. And we would hold workshops and events that were curated for and by that community. And so that ranged from, workshops that were to do with consent within the kink community, all the way up to cabaret shows. And when COVID hit, we moved into the film space because the whole ethos around Bohemia was always finding new ways to amplify historically underserved communities. And we all worked in film anyway, and so we're better to bring that ethos into film. And what we found was just how many of those types of movies that were queer stories, or I mean, I have my own personal stake in this. I identify as queer, but I have disabled relatives, so I wanted to see what kinds of disability representation within cinema. And similarly, other colleagues of mine at the company have other places in different communities too. And we wanted to see what different representation there was. And what we found was just how many stories were out there that really did tap into those communities, but they weren't being offered the platforms that a lot of other movies that didn't really address those communities being offered. So we then stepped in and basically started to sort of play around with the idea of, how can we give these films the platforms that they deserve? And because we started out in this community space, we wanted to bring the ethos of that into everything that we do. So even in the way that we release our films, we do it in mind of ensuring that the communities that we work with, there is a developed understanding, there is a developed nuances we understand the nuances of those communities. It's kind of like every family has their own language, and we've sort of found the same, that every community has their own language as well. So we work with grassroots organizations and NGOs and charities who are embedded in the communities that are being depicted on the screen. And we also kind of wanted to, you know, see which ways you could work on that, whether it's a singular event or a big impact campaign, and just trying out different sort of methods of ways in which you can do that, and ways you can reach those audiences. Because we got started in the heart of the first lockdown, where everything had to be done in a virtual space, so we have put a lot of our resources into that, and that has developed into us building our own streaming platform, which is called Bohemia Euphoria. And that again, it's all to do with community space. So rather than just creating another Netflix, we wanted to enhance the space that we had at the pub by being able to bring our titles, to create workshops and events around those, and really kind of bring those stories to those communities in a way that people can actually join in and interact. So finding different ways in which people can do that, whether that is, I mean, you know, watch parties or the thing over lockdown, but also, you know, as also Q&As, also masterclasses with the filmmakers, running commentaries as the film is going on, all these sort of different ideas that we're experimenting with. We're in beta with it at the moment with the platform, but we'll be launching it sort of later on this year. And it's been the thing that's come up the most, and we have released films in theaters as well, but the thing that has come up the most for us is this idea of accessibility. We've always applied it to how cinemas make their venues accessible, and of course you put that down to, you know, disabled audiences, making sure that there are caption screenings, making sure that your venues are physically accessible, can they get into the screening rooms, but also as well, as we were sort of picking at that, and there were a lot of cinemas that we have worked with where they didn't really have very good forms of accessibility. They kind of just had the bare minimum legal requirement, but that shouldn't necessarily be used as a baseline, because that wasn't written by disabled people, that was written by like a governmental policy. But people, disabled folks, kind of need a bit more than just a ramp in a venue. You know, you need to kind of go that extra mile to ensure they can enjoy it as much as a non-disabled person can enjoy it. But also as well, we were thinking about that the types of content that we're working on, the types of stories that we're working with, you know, there are going to be audiences that perhaps they don't have an internal language in themselves to know that maybe they do identify as LGBTQ+, or maybe they're not fully aware of the racial inequalities of the world. And some other reason that means that they don't really want to be seen going into a cinema to watch a story about, say, a queer story, because there's something they have not recognized with that part of themselves, and they don't want to be seen going into it. So what we do on the platform is we work with these grassroots organizations and these different types of bodies where you can create a safe space, so that it may not be as spectacular as watching it on the big screen, but the most important thing is that you are watching it in an environment that you feel most comfortable. So then our distribution strategy comes down to ensuring that the community that we work with feel at their most comfortable watching it, and they can watch it in fully accessible environments. So we give all the resources available that we can find, whether it's captioning or whether it's just resources on being able to read up on materials that are addressed in the film, and ensuring that by the time they come out of it and they've engaged with a workshop or a Q&A or something, that they are really connected with that story. And then that determines, of course, the next film that gets made, if more people feel safe to watch those stories, and more and more people start to engage with that type of content. And that's sort of the aim we're hoping for, so that more stories like that can be made, and that there are more ways in which you can engage with them.
Thank you, Andy. That was very, very interesting and very detailed into what you guys do, which is super, super good. Amy, while he was talking, I was thinking from a producer's perspective, and both I want to know, what are you going to do next with the funding that you got from Sundance? Of course, what are the next plans? But also, I want to talk a bit about sustainability, right, from a producer's perspective, because we can do so much with films, and we know that. But somehow in the independent sectors, it feels like the more nuanced we become and the more niche we become, the least sustainable it is from a business perspective. And maybe this is a perception, or maybe, what do you think, Amy?
It's not a perception. It's incredibly hard to sustain a career. I mean, I would say that my career has become bifurcated, right? So yeah. I do quite well, if I want to just be a for hire producer, work for streamers. That's one Amy over here. And then there's another Amy who really wants to make content that is outside the box, that's unique, that's very auteur driven, and that is hard to sustain. So I kind of try to balance the two, and it's utterly exhausting. But I think there are things that we can start to do as a global independent community. And one thing that I would, I know it seems boring, but the legal side of it, not giving away all your rights, that gives you an opportunity to exploit things for your own benefit, or having shortened terms, having films revert back to you. I've had a number of my films where all of the rights have reverted back to us as a team, as an LLC, and then we're able to re-exploit them in a manner that we like. So that, combined with platforms, with what Ryan and Andy are doing. There's another platform called Artini that's super interesting right now. But and I say the more options, the better. So that the more tools of self-distribution that are available for producers that cut out all of those middle people that suck the life and money out of your film distribution, the lawyers, the agents, the reps, the sale, all of that, the fees, the sub fees. So being able to get those rights back sooner, to be able to retain some of those rights in the first place, and then combined with having new platforms that allow reasonable participation and transparency is an exciting path. And I do see that it's starting to happen. But there does need to be a lot of education of filmmakers. You can't just expect to go to Sundance and sell your film and move on.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it starts with the, understanding the legal rights and what it means to give away your IP.
Absolutely. Yeah, and in that note, we had a panel yesterday exactly about that, like how we work around IP and working with streamers from different positions, from producers and directors. You're going to find it in YouTube if you're listening to this video and you're interested in forking into that. What Amy is saying, look for the other video.
There's no reason to ever give up your derivative rights, right? And for those who don't know what derivative rights are, it's like, I sell you my documentary, but then you also have the right to a story about one of the characters, to a scripted film, to all sorts of other things related
radio
to
show.
But that are not the film. They aren't the film. It's another thing.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that also what happens many times is, especially in the independent sector, we know it very well as producers, when we finish the film, when the film is in the can, we're kind of halfway. We still need to go another halfway.
And we're tired. We're already tired.
Exactly. And we're extremely tired. We are without resources. And this is where someone may be listening, for example, to you, Ryan, and say, oh, that's actually great, of my film in churches. So how can I, as an independent filmmaker with my film just finished, think, and probably very few resources, think that I can work with Kinema? Is that possible, or do I need to have loads of resources to go to you?
Oh, absolutely not. No. And in fact, I just want to really echo what Amy said, because it's very true that oftentimes filmmakers, when they are presented with deals from some of these amazing streamers, these streamers are taking all of your rights, which really cuts off additional revenue streams for your film. We're a pro filmmaker platform. We are as I said, we're non-exclusive, so we can work along an educational distributor. We can work alongside your impact producer. We could work alongside the streamers. That's the toughest nut, I think, for Kinema to crack right now, but I have a feeling we'll find it when we find the right projects. But generally, our platform is, you can access it for a very small fee that we recoup off the top, but the revenue splits, I mean, we're we're open. It's 80% goes back to the content owner, 20% stays with Kinema when a licensor or a licensee decides to buy out a screening or host a screening that their friends can come to or their constituents can come to for free. They can also choose to sell tickets, and that split is that 50% of those ticket sales go back to the content owner, 40% stay with that event organizer, and 10% goes to Kinema. So it's actually, you know, we're working across the board with, you know, from Frameline to Magnolia to Greenwich Entertainment. So, you know, the smaller distributors are seeing the benefits for us because, you know, they're having a difficult time reaching their audiences as well because of these behemoth streamers. But we're also working alongside single filmmakers, you know, from Sarajevo. We have a couple of actually. So, you know, we're able to really kind of go small or, you know, large. It depends on what's presented to us. But the whole idea is to democratize films and bring them to new audiences that might not have access to them.
And thank you. And I was thinking about the middle people, right? The middle structures that Amy mentioned. And of course, I think, Esther, Piano is a production company that decided to create a distribution company. And there are so many out there as well that have done it. We are effectively getting rid of the sales here, right? And is that how you at Piano see the future, that we need to become more nimble and, you know, producer distribution is a more direct street?
Well, first, I think that it's important to tell that Piano was created, distribution hand of Piano was created for that reason, because they started to make films, and at some point they decided that it wasn't really nice that the distributors or the people they find in the middle of the between the films and to reach the audiences. So they created the distribution side, and we tried to work our best to not be this distribution company that takes like advantage, or we usually try to make deals without we try to release in a very good specific way to not to make you lose the few money you can reach. We try it our best. Sometimes it's difficult, of course, but it's hard. I think that we have two things to think in this matter, because obviously it's easier sometimes for you as a producer to go directly and to find your own way, but sometimes we can think also that we as distributors, we have like a little more open gate to the main exhibitors company. For example, here in Mexico, it's easier to get to the cineplexes, even if you are going with 10 copies or something like that with them. It's easier if you have a distribution company. We also have like the experience, the clients, the providers that can help us to wait for not to spend the money in just one moment, or we can find like deals that can make easier to not to lose money with providers to release your film. But I can't deny that how the world is coming is easier for a producer, and it's nice for a producer too, because I think that it's not something that we are fighting, but I think that it's interesting, and it's very clear that at some point producers have to find their way to distribution on their own, because we are having so much films, we are having so much spaces to reach. But I think we have to be very, very creative with what we have. But I also think that we can do it together, that we can as distributors be more attentive of what producers and directors are looking for. We try in Piano, we try to every step being side by side, talking a lot. If you don't like the poster, we can change it. the point for us is to do what you want to do with the film, also with our with the expertise we have, but making you feel comfortable, because if not, we are not playing in a fair game. And we also try a lot to tell them, if we want to go like, oh, I want to show the film in an open community with a lot of people, we usually say, let's go for it, but let's try to respect just these small windows and that kind of things, being very, very, very flexible about it, because it's the time not to be this squared distribution company to say, no, we have to wait, because in terms of that, we end not making partners. I really like what Amy said about the globally independent community. I think that in distribution we have that too. It's not, we are not going alone in this way. We don't want to be just the distributors, you know. I think it's the way we can work together.
Absolutely. And I think that it may not be so clear for others, but for example, I don't know, maybe, but in Latin America, being this flexible, it's a new concept. It's a very monolithic, I mean, for other countries and for other territories like the UK or especially the US, the flexibility is, the US is a completely deregulated market. So flexibility is the name of the game. But in other places that are highly regulated, with the monolithic structures and big companies behind the whole cinema business, being this flexible is a completely weird occurrence, let's say. So kudos to starting the road for sure, or to keeping the road. And Andy, on that same note, how do you see the UK as a market that needs to find how to exploit these new spaces or these flexible spaces, coping with the old-fashioned or traditional system that is also very big and very long established in the UK?
I mean, it's interesting, because it's interesting that everyone is kind of talking about these alternative venues in which they're screening their films, because it's something that we're very conscious of as well. And we're sort of learning, you know, that there are all these different venues that do actually have the capacity to screen a film, because all you really need is like a projector and then you can find a way to get the film delivered on there. So then the world is kind of your oyster. And actually, in the Apple Tree pub, we're building a cinema/theatre space in the basement, and we're going to be able to screen the films that we acquire there, and have the capabilities of being able to stream those to our VOD platform. But what's interesting in that looking in the cinema space is that as things start to open up, Blockbuster's been backlogged up until now, so the independent space just is not really flourishing in cinema space at the moment. That we are sort of having to look to alternative spaces, whether that is, you know, kind of community cinemas or just venues where you can just get a projector up and running. But it seems as though that it's hard to know where things are going to land in the independent sector, because the dust is still sort of settling after everyone being kind of locked in this year and a bit long pandemic. That as people are now starting to come out of it, they are sort of going to Blockbusters, and so you have to kind of signpost these different alternative venues that are screening these films, and it's trying to find ways in which you can do that, and having to be a bit more creative in how you market that. And that's something that we're kind of coming up against, that the films that we work on are all very small. They all address you know, kind of taboo subjects, or they all address a part of the community that you kind of are only really find palatable just sort of seeing on Instagram, but then you scroll past it. And what we're trying to do is sort of create that safe space that people can come to these things and not feel alienated by them, but actually this is something to feel invited to, and that it's going to be open spaced. It's going to be open-minded, non-judgmental space. And I think that actually having that in alternative venues sort of makes that a bit more palatable. It's a bit more of a relaxed environment. Not to say that cinemas aren't, but because you can find a venue that is fully accessible to everyone and you can market it as such, then it does just become a slightly more different experience, a more communal experience. And I think that's the way in which we're trying to structure our distribution strategy, that there's a much more sort of community, a more community engagement than there has been previously, which has just always been in cinemas for people that can afford to go to the cinemas. So did that answer your question?
Yeah, well, I think you expanded the question beyond the UK, but like how you see it in general, which is good. And if I go back to the manifesto that Amy had proposed, I can see that we're talking about the resisting of the all right deals, and we're talking about the fuller spectrum of voices in this as well. And we're also talking about how to develop and test new distribution pathways. And also, in a way, we're talking about the rejection of this unequal structures, right? What is left behind so far, and again, I have to go to you, Amy, is the demand for radical transparency in reporting. And I think that every single producer I know and that has been in the independent space, we all have a lack of transparency in both in the exhibition, in the accountancy, from sales. Every time when our film leaves the gates, it seems that we become a bit more blind, as opposed to being able to see with our eyes a bit more open. So, I mean, our eyes are open for sure, but we are kind of behind loads of middle everything in a way. There are some questions in the audience. I'm going to go back to that, but I would like your take on how do we demand radical transparency in reporting? Amy, what, just by asking, we're not getting it.
Yeah. I think for smaller distributors, a good way, and for, super independent films, a good case that I've made on one occasion that was successful is to say, look, a lot of filmmakers imagine their film is doing better than it is. Just tell us, tell us 3 people watched it, and then we'll shut up and go away. Because if you look at, I like how well a lot of my super independent films have done. It's all about, you find that community, and a lot of them don't have huge box office numbers. So we're constantly pestering, what are our numbers? Just tell us, get off the hook. Right. And you're never going to get that from the streamers or studios. You're just not, it's just not going to happen. It's not they're
embedded in the system, you think? In the creation of
but that's again why you retain some of your rights. It's like eventually, if we can build a community and have some common demands that we can ask, and that some of the bigger films that might sell at Sundance bring some smaller filmmakers with them and join in community to demand something. Like if for me, a distributor, that's great, you have all rights, but my Nina Simone documentary, Nina Simone lived in Africa, for a while. I'm pretty sure there's a community that would like to see that film in Africa, but it's not being distributed there. I suppose now it might be many years later, but Netflix was not in a lot of those countries at that time. So they're just protecting the future, and also often building libraries, right? So if you can say, like, look, later when you have distribution in Armenia, come to me and let's talk. But until then, I would like to work with Ryan to get my film into, there's a great documentary club I met when I was in, they would have loved to have screened, one of my films. So like, again, just, I think it's going to take people banding together to start a movement to retaining some of those rights. And that's going to build towards the transparency, because companies, I'm sure, Ryan, you guys provide some data for your filmmakers. You can speak to that. But
yeah, absolutely. You have your own dashboard on our site. Everything is clear and transparent. You're actually paid out within 24 hours when you have screenings booked. Everything's open. As Amy said, the good, the bad, the ugly.
Yeah.
Sometimes 2 people show up. Sometimes 200 show up. But that's
yeah.
That's great. We're entering the last 20 minutes of the conversation, and I'm aware that people are asking questions. So I'm going to go to the questions. If anyone has other questions, please do place them in the Q&A, because I'm going to start reading them now. Some maybe it will take some of you to take them, but the first one says, with studios shortening the theatrical windows, is that the reason why exhibitors might be turning to a longer run independent film deals? I don't know if it's Andy, you want to take this one? I don't know if it's a parallel. It's almost like a parallel universe, what studios are doing with independence. So I don't know how we are interjecting between those two. Maya, if you want to explain a tiny bit more about that question. I'm not sure it's or somebody understands the question.
I'm not sure. Oh, you're frozen again. Uh-oh. Well, I'll talk. I'm not sure that I fully understand the question, but yes, we're certainly seeing windows collapsing. We're certainly seeing, the traditional theater distributors being more lenient to shorter windows. I think that's, I think this is the future has gotten shorter because of.
Question better than me. Want to jump to
sorry.
answer again?
I was just starting to answer, so we lost you for.
Thank you. I don't know. I'm sorry.
I don't know if I'm going to have the answer that the person is looking for, and I'm actually going off track. But I think windows are collapsing because of the pandemic, and eyeballs. At the end of the day, these eyeballs want to be on streaming platforms. This is what the executives have chosen. So I don't know if it makes things easier for us, but I know just from my experience. Awards, and this awards, like everyone is desperate to win gold medals, that these are the ways that kind of these alternate ways of distribution could help extend the life of the film. So, these companies just want their films in the ether. These are aura building things to create buzz and word of mouth. And, hopefully these things lead to awards for them. So we're working often with distributors who, after the traditional theatrical is over, after it's on iTunes, just to kind of keep the film out there so people continue to buzz about it. That's from my perspective.
Great, thank you. And I have another one. Maybe this is for you, Andy, because it says, can small or niche platforms retain and grow their audience in a market which is quite crowded and competitive? And is it possible to retain their independence as well?
I mean, it is sort of the million-dollar question, really. But I think a lot of it kind of comes down to curation, sort of at an acquisition stage, the types of stories that you're then looking to acquire, and ensuring that the stories you're picking are ones that are the best ones, and that you have faith in them, so that you know that they're going to translate well to your audience. And it's certainly something that actually we have sort of learnt about from when we started. In all honesty, we were all about just picking up all kinds of content, ones that addressed marginalized groups just in some way or another. Let's just go and pick it up. And then after a while, we were seeing that our audiences were starting to drop off, because it was just like an overwhelming number. It's kind of like with, not that this really applies, but like with Netflix, when you kind of go on and look at Netflix and you just see an overwhelming number of shows or number of films, you end up just going to the same one, the one that you've already seen before, because it's just easier. And we were finding that the more titles that we were acquiring, the less people were kind of engaging with those titles. So we've since then changed our strategy to be a bit more curatorial and a bit more aware of the resources that we're putting into the films and the ones that we are acquiring and where we're putting them, which not that we were having like a completely thoughtless strategy before, but we were just looking for content. And now it's changing as much as people are aware of those stories that you're releasing. And particularly on our side of things, because Bohemia has a very specific brand, we want to ensure that we are retaining that loyalty. And particularly in an independent sector, and in a sector where you're working much closely with communities whose stories just haven't often been told on screen before, that requires a lot more of a sensitive approach, and particularly because you are asking a group of people to not only give up an hour and a half of their time, you're asking them to hand over like quite a delicate part of themselves in engaging with this, and you need to make sure that you're doing that quite respectfully. So and so the approach we're taking now is less is more. So and that seems to be working with retaining an independent audience within a niche sector to address that question.
Thank you. Sorry. What possibilities, anyone would like to add anything to that one, to that question? Sorry, I think it's answered. So what possibilities do you see for distribution through social media platforms? Esther, do you want to say something about that?
I think it's quite complicated right now, because even though we are, of course, willing to open the films to more spaces and to find their audiences, I think that in social media, the team with the rights and with the geolocalization and all that kind of things are unfortunately still managed by how we manage the rights of the films and how we manage the windows. Unfortunately, for social media, you go everywhere, and you go everywhere without knowing nothing, and also without knowing how can you really report that? How can you make it clear? I mean, yeah, you can see like how many people watch it, but you can see anything else. You can know if you're gonna have an audience engaged and an audience that it's probably paying or not for it. I think it's really hard, and it's also something to think, because as Andy was saying, we have a lot of places when we have a lot of content. We have, I think it becomes like this enormous world when we have all the platforms, all the spaces for our films, all the places, but we are not reaching the audiences we're looking for. So I think it's very delicate.
Thank you. Anyone else has any opinion about this, social media and distribution? All right, so the next question is, what would you say about the idea that short films will or already have more demand than feature ones? Who wants to take that one, Amy?
I think it's sort of true and not true. I would say that short films, I mean, the length of a film is becoming a little bit less relevant, right? Since streaming platforms, the length is very flexible. For content in general, series are no longer pegged to 28 minutes or whatever. One episode can be 40 minutes, one episode can be 20 minutes. So I think we're seeing the beginning of some flexibility around length. And there are platforms that show just short films. On the doc side, for sure, all of the news platforms, Guardian, New York Times, Atlantic, etc. So I do think there's I mean, I don't think they're gonna have more demand. I think there's just gonna be a growing flexibility in length and tolerance for different length of media.
Yeah, it also made me think of Quibi, because if it's true that short engages more, it didn't. So
yeah.
sorry to say.
That's a good example.
So I think it's more on that note, it's flexibility of length, right?
Yeah.
Anyone has any other thought around that? Should I go to the next question?
I guess it will depend on actually, I totally agree. I think there is a flexibility in length now, and with what streamers have brought into that space. I think it'll be interesting to see how that evolves, certainly like as generations grow. I think a lot of the idea of short films and episodic content seems to come down to this idea of lack of attention span, like with younger generations looking at like TikToks and all this sort of stuff. I don't know if that's necessarily entirely true, but I think perhaps there is some logic to it, but I don't know if that will apply necessarily all to short films, and that being in more demand than features, as Amy said. But it'll be interesting to see how that develops with generations.
It's funny, the idea of the attention span, because then again we see younger people binging into series,
Exactly.
right? Like
Yeah.
my son watches a 25-minute episode after another, and suddenly he's watching 10 episodes, which is like longer than a I don't know, like a Russian film. So I have another one. I think this one is for you, Ryan. It says Kinema is a good idea. There have been other similar initiatives like Tug, but it hasn't survived. Why? What happened? Maybe this is a twofold question. Is Kinema like Tug? I would say it's the first one. And the second one is, what happened to Tug?
Well, I have ideas of what happened to Tug, but I certainly am not an expert in Tug. But I think Andy actually said it best before. It's about curation. You know, my experience with Tug was that it was like Netflix, so overwhelming that I didn't know where to start. And I think that if somebody coming from the media landscape, not figuring out how it works is troublesome. You know, I think that, like Andy, I'm ahead of curation. So we're really trying, you know, less is more for us. It's really getting behind films that we believe will be attractive to our host network and that might draw in new hosts, you know, untold stories from filmmakers from around the globe, from, you know, underrepresented voices. I also think that Tug had really tricky partnerships with their cinema chains. I know that their screenings were often canceled because of lack of interest, even though if people did buy tickets, if there were, you know, less than a certain amount of people in those seats, that the screenings would be canceled. So I think it was a messy scenario because if they got too big with too much content and couldn't handle their partnerships well. And you're frozen again. Every time I speak, you freeze.
Brian, you're freezing our moderator.
I know what's going
I'm
on.
good. Am I back? I'm here.
You're
I don't know what happened. So I'm
Yay.
sorry. Yeah, I'm back. I heard you. Actually, I heard you until you said, and now you're frozen. And then I froze. Anyway, thanks very much. That was just the good things that you needed to address that were addressed. And I have a last question, and we're almost running out of time. So I would say it's the last question, unless somebody wants a very, very last question. This is going to be it. And I think that, Amy, this could be yours. It says, surely theaters with shorter windows will leave them needing more content. Isn't that good news for independent filmmakers? And then it creates a need for other platforms, alternatives to Netflix, especially if we can find streaming platforms in different territories to cater to better to niche or more relevant audiences. So I think that's two different questions. I would say the first bit is the theaters having shorter windows, they need more content. Isn't that good news for independent filmmakers?
Yeah, that doesn't apply because the theaters have deals with the studios, right? Yeah. And there's a lot of vertical integration that's been going on. So streamers are buying now the theaters. So you guys, for anyone who's calling in from New York, the Paris Theater, Great Old Theater, is owned by Netflix and used for its purposes. There's been some other acquisitions of theater chains by streamers. It's all one big blob of ownership. So that's not necessarily good news. I do think there's a way future opportunity there. I just had the pleasure to interview the CEO of AMC Theaters. That's why I was in Kansas last week. And this is a company that was on the brink of bankruptcy. And he has been looking for new ways to engage audiences. They're going to accept Bitcoin at their theaters by the end of the year. They're really trying to think of new ways to make it a viable business. So I do feel it's kind of, again, like it's both, right? It's hopeless on the one hand, but maybe there's a crack of opportunity on the other hand.
Well, and on that note, which talks about both the problem and the crack of opportunity, which I think that that is what independent filmmakers we are made of, going for those things. Once again, thanks to the audience. I think that we are almost running fully out of time, but I'm going to ask from all of you, one last nugget of advice, a little bit of inspiration. I think Amy's one was really good. Andy, last words, Ester, Ryan, what do we say about distribution and the alternatives that we have in front of us after this pandemic?
Well, I'll go. I think the thing that's calming to me a bit is that we actually are all in this together now. I think I get my news the same time you're getting your news. We're pivoting daily together. That does give me hope that there's, you know, even the biggest executives at these biggest streamers who are, you know, so difficult to reach and inaccessible, are figuring out things as we're figuring them out. So it gives me hope that we'll be able to work together. And to Esther's point, it has to be partnership. This is how we're gonna figure this nut out.
Esther?
Yes, I think we are in a very interesting moment to do a lot of things. I think it's a time to keep breaking all these structures and all these things that take us to this place. And I also think it's very important for us to be near and to know our audiences, because we have to think which are the interesting of young people watching series, or what are the interests of all people who want to return to theaters. But we need to be closer to them, to know what they are looking for, to know what we can do, and not to change what we are doing, like creatively, but yes, how we can approach to younger people and to people to return to cinemas like we were before, but not with the big movies, with all the movies, because we can find audiences for every movie.
Thank you. Andy, one last bit.
I totally agree with what these guys have said, and that particularly breaking structures, there's now no need to be competitive, really. We are all in this together, and this has really made us all see that vying for the top, that's a pointless exercise. Forming partnerships and ensuring that you know your audience as best you can, and sharing information and knowledge is the only way we can ensure that audiences are going to get the best kinds of stories in the independent world.
Amy, one last bit. Any?
I don't know. It's the same thing. Community, ask, reach out, talk to people, talk to other producers. I didn't do that a lot when I was coming up, and, get advice about your rights, yeah.
Yeah. Strengthening unity and doing what one wants the industry to do for oneself as well. Like reciprocating with that, yep. I would say. Well, once again, thanks everybody. We have 2 more.
2 more minutes.
Hours.
The Sopranos just ends mid-sentence.
Talks ahead of us. Tomorrow I'm talking at PM. Where are we now? So I'm back. I'm going to use this time, very short time, to say thank you once again. 2 more talks to go. Tomorrow we are talking about mental health in the industry, and with wonderful panelists, Malika Rollins and Pamela Drame and Victoria Thomas, Rebecca Day.
Once again, we lost her, but
have a good time at the other panels.
Thank you, everyone. And
thank you, everyone,
for being such a wonderful moderator.
Yep.
Thanks very much.
And also, oh my God, it's better. Thanks, everybody. And then I'll see you on Wednesday on the last panel about if critics are still needed. We're going to discuss that as the last frontier. All right. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Paula.